Emil Cadlick here again with FantasyNation.com. We got another special pioneer of fantasy sports who actually worked back and started in 1996. He currently works for RotoBaller, formerly ESPN, SportsLine, and many other. Really excited to introduce Scott Engel, the King.
How are you today? Thanks for having. I'm doing good, Emil. It's good to be with you. My toughest decision for tonight was, should I look like this or should I do this for the entire interview? As Adam Shine once said about me, a grown man wearing a crown.
Yeah, they both work for you, so equally impressive. So tell me about your youth. When you were growing up, what sports were you interested in?
Probably grew up, and it's very interesting we're doing this, and like the eve of my father's birthday, he passed in 2012, and he was a huge influence on me. He was a huge baseball fan, and I grew up in Flushing, Queens, and when I had a good report card, my reward was going to a Mets game. So, I loved baseball. I wanted to be Tom Seaver or John Milner when I was a kid. And baseball is what really got me into sports. But what got me into sports writing was I became a big New York Knicks fan around, the era of Bernard King. And when I was in high school, the New York Knicks had a high school sports editors writing contest. And I won the whole thing. I ended up in the game program, courtside seats and everything. I just wanted the tickets. The advisor for the student newspaper at Thomas Edison High School in Queens told me, well, if you want the tickets, you have to write a story. So I went to a press conference. I wrote a story in the school paper. I mailed it into the Knicks. I won the writing contest. And I said, I've never been more than like an average player than any sport that I tried, but I did so much reading when I was growing up. There were two things that I read. I read sports magazines, and when I was growing up, I was a huge Kiss fan, so I would always grab every magazine that had Kiss on the newsstands and read it. The more I read, the more I absorbed, and the more writing came naturally to me. And I started out as a big baseball fan, basketball, and then I really, really started getting into the NFL when I was in high school too. And eventually that became my favorite sport. But, I still love baseball, and thanks to my son, I eventually became a NASCAR fan too.
Wow, very good. So when you won this award writing for the New York Knicks, what year was this? Do you remember roughly?
I don't want to date myself. 2017. No, this was 1984 actually. Wow, my senior year in high school. I got courtside seats. I was in the game program, on court picture with Bernard King. They wrote about me in the game program, and I said, wow, maybe I have something here. So then I ended up going to LaGuardia Community College in Queens and Long Island University's Brooklyn campus, and started to build my writing career.
So what kind of classes were you taking at these, journalism or anything else?
Yeah, journalism, but community college. I became the editor of the school paper, and I wrote about the intramural leagues like they were the pros. And then at Long Island University, I became the sports editor. But then I dabbled writing for some community newspapers. This was the pre-internet era. Being sports editor of community newspapers and writing about semi-pro and Sandlot and Little League teams like they were the pros. And it just developed. It developed from there. I ended up in New York Newsday for a year before what we're going to get into is start my writing career. But I was always so into sports. I didn't have a full-time job in writing. When I did that, I was working in sports retail. I used to run sports stores and sell hats and jerseys and stuff like that. I still love doing that. I learned the difference between different types of new era hats and things like that. Like one of my favorite stories is just LL Cool J would just never let anybody see his head. Back in the early days of his career. And I was working one of the biggest sports stores in Manhattan, Paragon Sporting Goods. LL Cool J came in and He's looking at the hats. He loves the way I'm describing them. And so he calls me over to the dressing room with him, and he's making me pass the New Era hats over the top of the dressing room so he can try them on. He said, I love selling hats and jerseys and collecting them and, just sharing that with people. I've always been a sports guy.
Wow. So you're working at a sports store, and you were doing a little writing at the time or not? Or when did you start to do some more writing?
I remember when I was working at the sports store too. That's when I first started reading Fantasy Football Weekly, which was run by Paul Charchian at the time. And an interesting story that me and Charch share is that I called up Fantasy Football Weekly and said, "Hey, I have an article idea for you about individual defensive players." Charchian ran me off the phone. "Yeah, we get a lot of contributions, kid. Send me something. It better be special." Bam. Years later we laugh about that. But what happened was I moved to Florida in 1996, and I was working at Sports Authority, and it wasn't working out. I was a manager, and those things that you drive, they would call it the beeper, but it was like a forklift. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't drive the forklift, and I took out a $3,000 end cap, smashing into it with a forklift. So it wasn't working out. But then I saw an ad in the newspaper for SportsLine, which was SportsLine USA, which was a new company. I saw it in the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, and I faxed my resume over. And Mike Kahn, the late Mike Kahn, who was a longtime beat reporter for the Seattle Seahawks, saw on my resume that I wrote for Inside the Seahawks, which back in those days was kind of like a fan publication, but more the professional way. They used to have Steelers Digest, Dolphins Digest, and it interested him. And he called me in for an interview, and I got hired to work in the newsroom at SportsLine USA. But that wasn't working out because it was just, just edit this little thing, put this feature box up here. And after 6 months, they did like the way back in those days at SportsLine USA, they had something groundbreaking called Football Live, where it was the first time in 1996-97, where you could watch a game between two teams and see the play-by-play without watching the game. You'd see the helmet move, and I was very good at that. I would handle 2-3 times in a game. So I say, okay, we got something here with this guy. After 6 months, they brought me to meet Rick Wolf at the end of 1996. And he said to me, "It's not working out in the newsroom with you, but we feel you got potential. We want to put you half of the day in one department and half of the day in the other. And we'll see what works. After 6 months, if it's working out, you pick what you want. If not, then we're going to have to talk." So in the mornings, I will work for Vegas Insider doing the injury reports. In the afternoon, I would work for the fantasy department. My only fantasy experience was playing at Paragon. I won the first time I played, the whole league. So I kind of started picking up quickly, and after 6 months, they said both sides wanted me. Rick wanted me in fantasy, and the Vegas people wanted me to stay in Vegas. And I went with the fantasy department, and everybody in the Vegas department got fired 7 months later. So I made the right choice, and that's how I started my fantasy career. Basically, I was the first full-time writer and editor ever at SportsLine USA before it ever became CBS SportsLine. Carl Foster and John Zaleski were doing radio, but there wasn't somebody full-time editorial yet.
Wow. Oh, that's fantastic. What's the Paragon League?
It was a store it was a sporting goods store in Manhattan on 18th and Broadway. It's pretty famous for those who live in New York. And they at that store, they had started a fantasy football league in 1994. I've never played before, but I always played Stratomatic and Madden and everything. So it came natural to me. And when I came back from vacation, they told me that the draft was done. So one of my coworkers said, "Hey, would you help me run the team?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I helped him draft. But then 2 weeks in, some guy wasn't paying attention to his team, and they said, "If you want to take the team over, go ahead. So I paid the $150, took the team over, lost one game the rest of the way, and ended up beating the team that I drafted in the Super Bowl. And it was an IDP league. I would look at the stats in USA Today, and I ended up like picking up Chris Warren off of waivers, Terrence Metcalf off of waivers, and trading away Troy Aikman to get Steve Young. So, and it were individual defenders. I had like Ronnie Lott, Tim Goad, Ed McDaniel, Greg Lloyd, and I instantly took to it. I dominated the league the first time I played.
You were the king.
Yeah, I was the king. Yeah.
And you remember all these players, and it was it 97-ish or so? That was like 24
This was
years
94. This was 94.
Oh, this is 94. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
This is before you got
But I
hired
didn't
by
play
Sports-
fantasy. Yeah, there was 3 years before I got hired. But it was kind of hard in those days. They didn't have the internet to like find a fantasy football league. But then I started really getting into fantasy baseball once I started working there.
So you worked with SportsLine, and then then you evolved into some other places. What happened next?
8 years at CBS
Wow.
SportsLine, which eventually became CBS SportsLine. I eventually became the managing editor of fantasy sports and a senior writer. And you remember in 2000 that SportsLine bought Commissioner.com, which really made just the whole thing explode. And I was there for 8 memorable years. And at one point, I identified and hired a real all-star team of writers under me. And I'm not saying under me, these guys were under me. I was their boss. Blah, blah, blah. I'm just saying I handpicked to be hired Michael Fabiano and Tristan Cockcroft, and they started their careers at CBS SportsLine with me. Also, David Ganos and Daniel Dobish.
Wow.
As well. We had a complete all-star team, and there was a hard-working guy named Martin McRae too. And we basically developed the whole editorial outlook for CBS SportsLine, and I stayed there till 2004. And I still remember the stunned look on their faces when they told me I was leaving. They thought I was going to be there forever. What's interesting is I got hired back by CBS Interactive in this past November as an editor. And I'm working over on the gambling side as an editor right now as one of my other jobs. So I sort of came back home. But it was under Rick Wolf and Chris Weeks, who's no longer in the fantasy business, but was a great boss of mine, David Hirsch, all the great commissioner guys that basically I built the beginning of my career. And really that was the foundation of everything that I've done.
Wow. Tell me about working for ESPN.
So in 2004, Brandon Funston was a good friend of mine, and he told me he was leaving ESPN. I was friendly with Eric Karabell, even though he's a Phillies fan and I'm a Mets fan. But we got along, see each other at conferences, hang out, things like that. And he recommended for me to replace him. So I moved to Bristol in 2004 because if you're in this kind of career, it's something you feel you have to try. Mm-hmm. I was there for 4 years. I could always say I was at ESPN. And I met some good people there that I'm still friends with. But I think I had a lot more fun and got a lot more out of it being at CBS Sports, at CBS SportsLine. Those were some of the favorite years of my career. Tristan Cockcroft followed me to ESPN, which I loved. He's one of my favorite people in the industry. Eric Karabell was, total professional. I was there towards the end when Matt Berry came in. I was on the way out when Matt was sort of coming in. So I got to see the beginning of that era, but I moved on in 2004.
Cool. So where'd you go next?
So next, I saw an ad on Craigslist, of all places, of a new fantasy company that was looking for writers, and I reached out, and RotoExperts was in its infancy, and I spoke to the people there, and they took me on full-time as a big move they wanted to make. And basically from the content perspective, from the staffing perspective, I was a huge part of building RotoExperts and making it rise to prominence because I knew so many people in the fantasy industry, and when they found out from a content perspective that I was leading the site, and there were some other good people there at the time too, we quickly rose to prominence, quicker than anybody expected. All of a sudden, we were getting syndication deals with places like Yahoo and Sports Illustrated, et cetera. But the big break really came like around, I want to say 2010 or so, when an old friend gave me a phone call. And Michael Fabiano was looking to outsource some content because NFL.com didn't have Adam Rank yet or any of those guys, Marcus Grant. And Mike was running the editorial ship over at NFL.com. And Mike said, I'd like you to write some stuff for me. Would you be willing to do it? I said, yeah, as long as we promote RotoExperts. He's like, no problem. So all of a sudden, RotoExperts was in bed with NFL.com. And from there, it just grew to all kinds of levels. We've started. I'd be proud to say we started a lot of fantasy careers at RotoExperts. People all over the industry that and the NFL was the first big thing to really put us on the map, and then Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio launched in 2010, and I was the host of the morning show along with Adam Ronis. And that really made the RotoExperts brand grow more than ever because the channel, as you know, took off. And we were this morning show. We were a combination of information and wackiness and for 3 hours every morning. And people loved it from 2010 to 2016. We became bigger than I ever knew in retrospect. I still have people come up to me this day. Oh, I love the show. It was great. We had a great run from 2010 to 2016. And I'm proud to say that with RotoBaller, and I love those guys, thank you so much. Last year I returned to Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio, and I'm back on 6 days a week. But that was really big. That really put the two items that really put RotoExperts in the forefront were getting to deal with the NFL and getting on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio. I'm proud to say I was the first voice that you ever heard the day the channel launched.
You were the first one. I did not know that. I remember you had me on once or twice, and I remember you guys were hilarious, goofing around and doing funny stuff. And, Bob Harris and I always talk about information, entertainment. You got to have both of those, and you definitely had it and have it.
Yeah, we definitely had it. I should be a little funnier, It seems like my current shows are all serious. It's hard to replicate that kind of chemistry, but it was really a great time. It's accomplished so much and really broke down a lot of fantasy doors. Thanks to my original producer, Mike DeMurgis, who had an idea of, come on, Scott, I'll get you press credentials for Major League Baseball. We'll go out to the park and we'll interview players fantasy style. And he got me credentials for the Mets. And I went over with a microphone and recorder, and I started interviewing players. It became part of the regular rotation. And all of a sudden, I'm getting regular credential for Major League Baseball as a fantasy guy, and still to this day. And there's very few of that going around. So we broke down a lot of doors at RotoExperts, and I helped connect them with a lot of people and help make a lot of deals. The Fantasy Sports Network, FNTSY, I helped launch that. I helped connect the right people so, that would happen. So I'm very proud that it came to an end last year, but, I was there for 11 years, and nobody will ever able to take that away from me or tell me that, I was not a significant part of what made RotoExperts and FNTSY what it became to be.
Oh, congratulations. Yeah, you had a fantastic career in all those. Now you're with RotoBaller and you're back on Sirius XM. When is your show on, by the way,
Yeah.
Sirius XM?
Right now, as we air this, I'm on 1 to 2 weekdays and 9 to 11 Saturday nights.
Very good.
I landed with RotoBaller last February. Those some of the greatest guys to work for. It's
What kind of work are you doing with RotoBaller? All the sports? Or?
I'm doing both radio and I'm writing football, baseball, and some NASCAR. And for the past 8 seasons, and this was through Mike Fabiano too, the Seattle Seahawks in 2012 were looking for a fantasy football writer, and I grew up being a big Seahawks fan. And Mike told them, I just got the guy for you. Connected me with the Seahawks, and since 2012, I have been the official fantasy writer of the Seahawks website. I'm published on there every year during the season, and whenever I want a credential to a game or help them cover it, if they're on the East Coast or if I want to go to Seattle, I'm part of the content team there, and sometimes I pinch myself. I'm covering the Mets. I'm out on the field at Citi Field, and the funny part is every Major League Baseball clubhouse has a fantasy football league. The players love fantasy football. So when they find out what I'm going to do, I get treated better than other reporters.
Like a king.
Because they know I'm not trying
like a king.
Yeah. I'm not trying to break a story or nothing like that. The guys find out they'll give me an interview because I'll help them with fantasy football. And if you see behind me right here, there's an autographed jersey personalized to the king from David Wright, who I helped with his fantasy football teams for a decade.
Oh.
It pinch myself. It's like, they tell 18-year-old Scott this, I'm sitting in the CenturyLink press box, hanging out in the locker room, talking to the players. David Wright and I going to lunch to talk fantasy football strategy. It's sometimes unbelievable. And then being on Sirius XM, you interview famous people all the time. It's a real kick.
Tell me about those trophies on your other side of you, on your right-hand side. What are those 3 trophies there?
Oh, that's from the Greenwich Street Tavern League. The Greenwich Street Tavern League is about 5 years old. It's a league that we do in New York City. It includes a lot of industry experts like Adam Ronis, Dr. Roto, people like that. High stakes players like Chris Vaccaro and Matt Modica, and a lot of very competitive fans. And there's 2 leagues. They do it like the NFFC. There's 2 leagues, and then you can win the overall. Those 3 trophies are because I've won my league in the last 3 years, and I've won the overall twice. In fact, this past season, I started 1-6, and I never lost again.
Wow. You really made a comeback. Yeah. That's fantastic.
And then I guess the thing that I have to grab here and that I got to show you that I'm pretty proud of here.
Oh, yeah.
Hopefully other stuff doesn't tumble. But this is my plaque for being an inaugural member of the Fantasy Sports Writers Association Hall of Fame. I was inducted with the original class in 2011, along with Eric Carabell, Matthew Berry, and Greg Kellogg.
Wow, that's fantastic. 2010, actually, on the trophy.
Yeah, well, the ceremony was in 2011, but we're fantasy guys, so we have to get this correct.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. Thank you for editing me. I appreciate it.
Well, congratulations on that. That's a great accomplishment to have that Writers Award. And that Writers Association, I've been the vice president since day one, and I know how detailed.
I remember the early conference calls. It was my idea to have the Hall of Fame.
Was it? Very good.
Yeah.
And the process we put together that we still have is a very complicated process. It's a 2-phase process, and I'm really proud at how they put it together. I'm kind of not. It's actually this committee that I don't even know how it runs. I'm the vice president. I'm not on the committee, so I don't even know what happens. It's but it's really well done, and it's a 2-phase process, and I really think they've done a great job, and it's been doing it for.
Well, I think you mean 2-step, 2-phase is definitely different.
Yeah, what did I say? Who knows? I'm tired too.
Yeah,
don't
let that guy get in. I hate him.
Right. No, that's not what happened.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, congratulations. Now, I can't remember. The Santa Fantasy Insights guys did a fantasy sports convention in 1998 at the Tropicana Hotel in Las Vegas. Were you there at all? I don't remember.
I don't think so. I was at a lot of the early FSTA conventions.
Okay, because that one actually spurred on the FSTAs, which started in 99 or 2000. Because when they had that conference, it just seemed obvious that, well, this is a nice B2B. We're actually doing more communication with us. And they all got in the room. I was in the room too. I don't even remember. They told me I was in the room. And then, a year later, we had the Fantasy Sports Players Association, which became the Trader Association, which became Fantasy Gaming and Trader
The
Association.
FSGA, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's too bad. That was a real fun one. I couldn't remember if you were there because I'm kind of old, and I don't remember those things. So, any other things I've left out that you'd like to talk about?
Oh boy, we could go 2 hours with this, but I think part of just what like makes this industry so special is a lot of the people that I've met and work with over the years and relationships that I've gained. We're competing with each other in this industry, but a lot of good friends and a lot of unforgettable people. Some of the people built RotoExperts with me, like Stephen Christopher and Doug Anderson and Jake Seeley. Yeah, at one point, we had another all-star team, as well. Being at FNTSY with people like Nando DeFino, Frank Stamfel, Mike Florio. I could go on forever. These people were the cornerstones of what was built over the years a lot in the industry. Adam Ronis, Corey Parson, all those kind of people who help really make the industry. And some of the places that I've been at, very, very, very special. Back in the SportsLine days, Tristan Cockroft, Michael Fabiano, Dan Dobish, and now being with the RotoBaller guys, just such a great team with Alex and Leor and they got the Anthony Aniano and Real Talk Raf and Josh Hayes, and at Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio, Matt Deutsch and Rob Tuzay, et cetera. Producers I've worked with like Rob Phoenix. There's so much, and I'm probably going to get off this interview with you and say, man, I forgot to mention that. But I don't think there's anything I haven't done fantasy-wise, not on my bucket list. I've been in every magazine I wanted to be in growing up. I work for the Seattle Seahawks. I cover the Mets. And the great part is I can even rope family into it. It's, my son, Sean Engel, you got to see him over on RotoBaller.com. He's a fantasy NASCAR expert.
Is he really? How old is he?
Yeah, he's 25, but when he was growing up, he always loved automobiles. Like, when he was a little kid, he used to love Matchbox and Hot Wheels and playing car video games and be driving a car in the street. He's like, oh, I know that make and that model. And so one day I turned on NASCAR when he was 5 and he loved it immediately. And I think he won his first league when he was 10. He was starting to write for RotoExperts when he was 13. And then when DraftKings started NASCAR in 2015, I gave him $20. I said, here, go play. A few weeks later, he had thousands of dollars because he had won a tournament. And he's won 6 tournaments already. And he's one of the featured NASCAR analysts on RotoBaller.com. And I bring him on Sirius XM every Friday for the father and son fantasy NASCAR segment. But there's certain people that I just would have never gotten certain places without, like Rick Wolf, people like that. You just keep with David Hirsch, Chris Weeks, people in my career who just Brandon Funston, Eric Carabell. It's a very long list. Steve Cohen, Matt Deutsch, Michael Fabiano. But I like to reach back and, I don't say it in ways like, hey, you owe me because I helped you. I can point back to this. So many people that companies I'm no longer with. You look at most of the staff, it's people that I identified and brought in.
That's fantastic.
And it's not in a way where, hey, you owe me, I helped you start, kind of thing. It's more of like I'm proud that I was able to kind of give back, if you will, like pay it forward.
That's fantastic. Several years ago, we were at the FSTA in Vegas. I think we were at the Mirage. And one of the nights, about 6 or 8 of us went out to the Imperial Palace to the karaoke. Do you recall that?
Yes, there's just about 3 times at the conferences, yeah.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. They actually roped me up there, and I did a Harry Chapin song. That's the last time I've ever done karaoke. You were a blast. Everybody loved how you do your stick, and it was really a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's the thing. I go to the conferences, and I'd kind of be like a social leader, sort of, and I'd bring everybody to karaoke, and I'd get up there and do Run DMC and Aerosmith and Vanilla Ice and Kiss, and just kind of try to bring the house down. It very often worked.
Oh yeah, we had a blast. Those were a lot of fun. I'm kind of I'm getting old and I'm introverted in some ways, and so it was fun to go up there. It was the only song I knew how to do, and I pulled it off, I guess. But
I remember you were pretty good, but those conferences are so much fun. Like making friends out of the conferences, like people like Jeff Stein of My Fantasy League.
Yeah, good guy.
Just hanging out at the conferences was just so much fun. Brendan Roberts back when he was with the Sporting News, just so many good times. Tim Healy, Tim Heaney.
Right. So there's a bunch of names. Do you remember Scott Higgins?
Yeah, I remember Higgy. He was always a blast from EA Sports.
He was like never at the show. He was off running around at the trade show. He was always running around doing other stuff. He was having fun too.
The best part though was seeing familiar faces like Greg Ambrosius just every year, and Charchian, and seeing some. When I go back to the conferences, and there's a bunch of us who are like real old timers, and it's just so wonderful to see them. Greg Ambrosius is like one of my favorite people in the industry. I mean, he was the original G-man. I call him the G-man because he was a G-man before Chris Berman ever started that with the Packers.
Oh,
I just that's like the example of this industry. If I walk into a conference or I walk into a draft and I see Greg Ambrosius, it's just like I get all warm and fuzzy.
That's nice.
Just seeing those people, and for so many years, and just knowing people like Lenny Melnick for all these years, Nando DeFino, and I could just go on and on. I love events like Tout Wars and all these communal events where I can just walk up to somebody and just practically tackle them because I love them.
That's great. Yeah, they're a great time. I went to the FSGA meeting this last January 2020, and Greg Ambrosius didn't come for some reason. Maybe he, I don't know what he's doing, but he's usually there. But it was a pretty good.
He's probably combing his mustache. Yeah.
There we are, getting ready for his fantasy baseball drafts. Well, Scott, you've had a fantastic career, and you're truly a pioneer of fantasy sports.
Thank you.
Congratulations on that career, and of course we're continuing on, and good luck in the RotoBallers, and glad you're back on Sirius XM radio. I'm going to have to listen in.
Look, it's not over. I love what I'm doing with RotoBaller, and being back home at CBS Interactive, doing some editorial work for them as well, and doing the thing for the Seahawks, comfortable spot. People always said about me, like, they've never seen it. This industry is very tough, and I've always managed to land on my feet, like the cliche would go. And, I'm glad to be here. I've had a lot of support. My wife, Victoria, has been like a rock for me throughout my career, and having my son kind of be in the industry right now is really cool.
That's really a great story. I did not know that. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, and congratulations again, and we look forward to seeing you at one of the next events or chatting on the phone.
All right. You can speak to my court jester. I'll set up a time.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Talk to you soon, Scott. Congrats.
Okay, Emmett.